The frame was already cracked when I pulled it off the wall. I remember staring at it for a long time. A simple white wooden frame I'd bought at a craft fair in Boulder 3 years ago, back when my husband and I were still the kind of couple who went to craft fairs together. The glass had a hairline fracture running corner to corner, so fine I'd never noticed it before. But now, holding it in both hands while the movers waited in the doorway, I could see the whole thing clearly. It had been broken for a while. I just hadn't been looking. I set it back down on the bare hardwood floor and walked out of our house for the last time. My ex-husband now, though the words still caught in my throat like something I'd swallowed wrong, had been very clear about the terms. The house was his. The car was mine, but only because it was a 2019 Honda with 80,000 miles on it, and he had no use for it. The furniture, the art we'd collected together, the copper pots I'd saved up for over 2 years, all of it stayed. He'd been generous about it, he said. Very generous. I should feel grateful. Derek was good at making me feel like gratitude was the appropriate response to my own erasure. We'd been married 4 years. Together for 2 before that. 6 years of my life that I'd poured into a man who kept a spreadsheet of my emotional outbursts, and once, during what he called a performance review of our marriage, I am not making this up, told me I lacked the stability required for motherhood. He didn't want children with someone like me, he said, too scattered, too impulsive. He'd spent 2 years telling me my inability to get pregnant was probably psychological, a symptom of my chaos. And I had believed him because I was 27 and he was 38, and he spoke with the kind of quiet authority that made you doubt your own name. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks before I did anything about them. Then one Tuesday morning I signed them, packed what fit in my Honda, and called my mother. "Come home," she said immediately. "I can't come home, Mom. I'm 30 years old." "Then come stay with me while you figure out where home is." I drove to Denver. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood called Whittier on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian that smelled like old wood and someone else's cooking. The landlord was a retired teacher named Gloria, who asked me 3 times if I was sure I could manage the stairs. I told her I was fine. I climbed those stairs that first night with a box of clothes and my broken picture frame and sat on the bare floor eating pizza from a place across the street. And I thought, this is what starting over looks like. Is like 30 years old, and a cracked frame and $4,200 in savings, and a Honda that needed new brake pads. My mother came the next morning with a carload of things she'd been saving for my childhood bedroom: a quilt she'd made, a cast-iron skillet, 2 lamps with mismatched shades. She stood in the middle of my empty studio and didn't say anything pitying, which was one of the many reasons I loved her. "It's small," she said finally. "It's mine." She nodded like that settled something important. Then she helped me make the bed, and we ate sandwiches on the floor because I didn't have a table yet, and she told me about her neighbor's new puppy and her book club's argument about a memoir and everything that had nothing to do with Derek. Before she left, she held my face in both hands the way she used to when I was small. "You were never what he said you were," she told me. I didn't cry until after she drove away. The apartment across the hall from mine belonged to a man I heard before I saw. Work boots on hardwood, early mornings. The low murmur of what I assumed was a phone call or a podcast, never loud enough to make out words. Sometimes the smell of coffee so good it drifted under my door. The first time I actually saw him was the 2nd week of August, when I came home to find my front door stuck. The humidity had swollen the frame, and I was standing in the hallway with a bag of groceries on each arm, shoulder-checking the door with escalating commitment, when it finally opened so abruptly that I stumbled forward and dropped both bags. An avocado rolled across the hallway floor and stopped against his boot. He picked it up. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting, and the kind of hands that looks like they actually did things. Calloused, capable. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt, and he looked at me with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was not nothing either. "Good grip on that one," he said, handing back the avocado. "Thanks, it was on sale." He helped me collect the rest of my groceries without being asked. His name was Marcus. He'd lived across the hall for 2 years. He worked, he said vaguely, in acquisitions. What does that mean? I asked. Mostly it means I look at things and decide if they're worth keeping. I thanked him for the help and went inside and didn't think much about it. My name is Claire Navarro. I'm a graphic designer. Freelance, which meant that after the divorce I had a skill set and no clients, because Derek had systematically, pleasantly discouraged every professional relationship I'd tried to build during our marriage. Too many late nights, he'd said. Clients asking too much of you. I didn't realize until I was sitting alone in Denver trying to rebuild a portfolio that what he'd actually been doing was making sure I stayed dependent. Scattered, he'd called me. What he'd meant was grounded only in him. I spent the first month rebuilding everything from scratch. Cold emails, portfolio updates, a LinkedIn profile that felt embarrassingly sparse for someone my age. I took on small jobs, logos for local businesses, a menu redesign for a restaurant 2 streets over, social graphics for a nonprofit that couldn't pay much but paid on time. I drank too much coffee and kept weird hours and discovered that I was, in fact, extremely good at my job when no one was telling me I was doing it wrong. My neighbor Marcus knocked on my door one October evening holding a cast iron pan. I burned something badly, he said. Do you have dish soap? I gave him dish soap. He returned it 20 minutes later with a container of leftover pasta he'd made by way of apology for the borrowing, which I thought was an unusual transaction, but accepted because I hadn't eaten dinner and it smelled incredible. This became, without either of us formally deciding it, a pattern. He knocked when he needed something minor. I knocked when I locked myself out, which happened twice because the key was slightly warped and required a specific angle I kept forgetting. He fixed the key. I didn't ask him to, but one morning it was just different. Smoother, the right angle built into the cut. And when I asked him about it, he shrugged and said he'd noticed it catching. He noticed things, Marcus. Quietly, without announcement. In November, my freelance work picked up enough that I stopped counting every transaction. I bought a kitchen table. I got the Honda's brake pads replaced. I started running again, something I hadn't done since Derek told me it made me difficult to schedule. I was learning, slowly, the difference between a life being built and a life being performed. My mother called every Sunday. I told her about the work, the city, the coffee shop 2 blocks away where I'd started going on Friday mornings. I did not tell her about Marcus across the hall because there was nothing to tell, and also because there was something I wasn't ready to examine yet, something about the way he listened, very still, when I talked, as if what I was saying mattered and he was keeping track. I ran into Derek in December. It was not the cosmic collision, it sounds like. He was in Denver for a real estate conference. He developed commercial properties, high-end retail spaces, the kind of projects that required him to wear expensive suits and use words like vision and portfolio synergy. I saw him coming out of a restaurant on Larimer Street, and for a full 3 seconds I stood on the sidewalk in the cold, like something had reached into my chest and rearranged things. He looked the same. Polished. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, younger, the kind of put-together that requires time and money, and the certainty that your put-togetherness is being observed. He saw me. He said my name. He said I looked well. He said Denver was a good fit for me, which I understood to mean small. Then he walked away, and I stood on the sidewalk until the cold reached my hands, and I thought about the spreadsheet and the performance review and the 6 years I'd spent shrinking myself into a shape he approved of. I went home and knocked on Marcus's door. He opened it in a flannel shirt and socks and looked at my face and said, "Come in." We sat in his kitchen and he made tea without asking if I wanted it, and I told him about Derek in a way I hadn't told anyone except my mother, not the curated version. The one that was wry and self-aware and demonstrated that I had processed things correctly. The real version. The spreadsheet. The words like scattered and unstable and too impulsive for children. The 4 years of becoming less. Marcus listened to all of it without saying anything until I was done. Then he said, "He was wrong about every single thing he said about you. You don't know me that well. I know you enough," he said. "I've watched you rebuild your entire professional life in 4 months. I've seen you be kind to Gloria's terrible cat twice, even though it hated you both times. You leave the hallway light on when you know I'm coming home late." He paused. "Those are not the behaviors of a scattered person." I looked at him across the kitchen table and felt something shift in me, quiet and significant, like a door opening in a house I hadn't known had a door. "Why do you know what time you're coming home late?" I asked. "I work strange hours. And, acquisitions." "Yes? What exactly do you acquire, Marcus?" He looked at me for a moment. "Companies, mostly. I look at businesses that are in trouble or that have been built on a foundation that won't hold, and I buy them. Sometimes I fix them. Sometimes I just prevent them from continuing to cause harm." Something about the way he said it made me sit still. "That's a very specific description," I said. "It's a very specific job." He didn't say anything more, and I didn't push. But walking back across the hall that night, I thought about the word acquisition, and the way he said prevent them from continuing to cause harm. And I filed it somewhere in the back of my mind like a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. January was when things changed. I was 3 days late, and I sat in my bathroom with a test from the drugstore on the corner and thought about all the things Derek had said over 4 years about my body's failings, my psychological blocks, my fundamental unsuitability. The test read positive. I sat on the tile floor for a long time. I called my mother first. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said, "Oh, sweetheart," in a voice that contained everything, and I started crying in a way I hadn't since I signed the divorce papers. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Okay, that's allowed. You don't have to know yet." I went to the doctor. The doctor sent me for an ultrasound. The ultrasound technician was quiet for a moment, moving the wand, and then she tilted the screen toward me and said, "So, there are 2. I stared at the screen. "2, I said. "Twins. Fraternal, looks like. You're about 8 weeks. I drove home in a specific kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was too full, so full that sound couldn't fit. I sat in my car in front of the Victorian for 20 minutes. Then I went upstairs and knocked on Marcus's door. He opened it and looked at my face again, the same way he had in December. "Something happened," he said. "Something happened," I confirmed. I told him. I watched his face carefully while I did, looking for the thing people sometimes couldn't help showing. The calculation. The recalibration. What this meant for him? For whatever this was between us. Instead, he looked at me with the same steadiness he always had and said, "How are you feeling about it?" "Terrified," I said, and also, I stopped. Also, like something is correct. Like this is a thing that was true about me even when someone was telling me it wasn't. He nodded slowly. "That's worth paying attention to," he said. We talked for 3 hours that night. About the practicalities and the fears and the version of the future I hadn't let myself imagine when I was married. At some point, he made soup from things in his refrigerator and we ate at his kitchen table, and I thought, this is a person who makes soup when things are hard. This is someone who shows up. I didn't know yet how much he had already been showing up, or in what ways, or what he had been doing quietly all this time while I was rebuilding myself across the hall. I found out in March. Derek came to Denver again. I knew he was there because he texted me, politely, the way he did everything, which was its own form of aggression. He said he'd heard I was expecting and wanted to congratulate me. He said he hoped I'd thought through the implications. He said he was glad I'd found someone suitable, though he hoped for the children's sake I had, and he used that word, suitable, like a verdict. I didn't respond, but that evening he appeared at the front door of the Victorian, and Gloria buzzed him up without knowing who he was because she assumed anyone in a coat that expensive had business being there. He knocked on my door. I opened it and said, "You need to leave." "Claire." He had his reasonable voice on, the one calibrated for talking me down from things. "I just want to talk. You're pregnant with twins. I think we should discuss." "There's nothing to discuss. You're my ex-husband. We're done." "You're not thinking clearly," he said. And those 4 words, in that tone, hit the old place in me that had spent years being reshaped by them. My hands went cold. And then the door across the hall opened. Marcus stepped out with his coffee cup and looked at Derek with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not hostile, just settled. The way a wall is settled. You don't argue with it because it doesn't have an opinion about you. It's simply there and you're not getting through it. Derek looked at him. Something shifted in Derek's face. I'm sorry, Marcus said. Not to me. I don't think she invited you here. This is a private conversation, Derek said. I know who you are, Marcus said. He said it the way someone says a fact that has already been established and doesn't require debate. I think you should go. Derek looked between us. The reasonable face flickered. And who exactly are you? Marcus said his full name. Marcus Elliott Vance. I watched Derek's face do something I had never seen it do in 6 years. It went uncertain. The calibrated, controlled, always prepared face of Derek Holt went briefly, completely uncertain. Vance Capital, Derek said. Yes. Derek left. He didn't say another word. He simply turned and went back down the stairs with a different quality to his footsteps than he'd come up with. I stood in the hallway and looked at Marcus. Vance Capital, I said. He looked back at me steadily. Yes, that's not acquisitions in the vague sense. That's one of the largest private equity firms in the Mountain West. It is. You've been living across the hall from me. I have. I sat down on the hallway floor because standing felt like a position that required more information than I currently had. Marcus sat down across from me, his back against his own door, like this was a perfectly normal place to have this conversation. How long have you known who Derek was? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I was looking at one of his commercial projects before you moved in. There were irregularities in the financing structure, investors being misled about returns, some contract manipulation. I was already conducting due diligence when you arrived. So when I moved in, it was a coincidence. You were a stranger with a stuck door and a dropped avocado. A pause. It stayed a coincidence for a long time. I want you to know that. What happened between us had nothing to do with Derek. I sat with that on the hallway floor for a moment. But you kept going, I said. With the investigation. Yes. And he looked at me quietly. The Meridian Project, his flagship development in downtown Denver, the one he's been selling investor shares in for 2 years, has a fraudulent foundation. Not the building. The ownership structure. He's been double selling equity stakes. Multiple investors think they own the same 30%. I knew the Meridian Project. Derek had talked about it constantly in our last year of marriage. His crowning achievement. His proof of vision. What happens to it? I asked. I filed with the SEC in February, Marcus said. The investors have been contacted. The assets are being acquired to settle the claims. He paused. Vance Capital is the acquiring party. I looked at him. You bought it, I said. We're in the process. You bought Derek's building. The building was never really Derek's, Marcus said. Not the way he told people it was. I thought about Derek standing at my door with his reasonable voice and his expensive coat and his word suitable. I thought about the spreadsheet and the performance reviews and the 4 years of being told I was too much and not enough simultaneously. I thought about the ultrasound image I had folded in my wallet. 2 small creatures, certain and present, who had decided to exist inside me while Derek was busy deciding I was psychologically unfit for them. I started laughing. It came out of nowhere. Genuine and a little wild, and Marcus watched me with something careful and warm in his face until I was done. I'm not laughing because I'm okay, I said. I'm laughing because he was so sure about everything. Every single thing. He was wrong about everything, Marcus said simply. He was wrong about the building, and he was wrong about you. I looked at him across the hallway floor. This quiet, careful man who fixed warped keys without being asked and made soup when things were hard and apparently in his spare time, was quietly dismantling the financial legacy of the man who had told me I wasn't built for the life I wanted. Marcus? I said. Yes. I think I need you to tell me what this is. Between us. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, I think you already know what it is. I think you've known for a while, and you've been waiting until you felt like you could trust your own knowing again. He was right. That was exactly it. Derek had spent years making me doubt the accuracy of my own perception, and the hardest thing about rebuilding wasn't the career or the apartment or the finances. It was learning to trust the signals my own body sent me. This is good. This is safe. This is real. I trust it, I said. My knowing. Good, said Marcus. My mother came to stay with me in April when I was 6 months along and too tired to do anything about the secondhand dresser I needed to assemble. She drove up from Colorado Springs with a carload of things she'd been collecting since I told her about the twins. 2 of everything. Tiny and soft. Folded in a laundry basket. She walked into the apartment and looked around at what it had become in 8 months, and her face did something quiet and satisfied. She met Marcus on the second day. I watched her watch him, the way he brought coffee without being asked, the way he deferred to her in the kitchen because it was her time with me, and he understood that without discussion, the way he answered her questions directly and without performance. My mother has a very accurate sensor for men who are trying to seem like something versus men who simply are something. I saw her make her determination. Later she told me, he reminds me of your father, not in the obvious ways, in the quiet ones. My father had died when I was 11. He was, according to every memory I had and every story my mother had told me, a man who showed up, who fixed things quietly, who made the space around him feel steadier. Yeah, I said. I know. Lily and Owen were born on a Tuesday in late June, 6 weeks early, which the doctor said was typical for twins, and which I experienced as the most terrifying and clarifying 12 hours of my life. My mother held my hand. Marcus was there when I came out of recovery, sitting in a chair by the window the way people sit when they have nowhere else they need to be. He looked at me first, not the babies, which I have thought about many times since. You're okay? He said. I'm okay, I said. Come see them. Lily had dark hair. Owen had none at all, which the nurse said was perfectly normal, and which made him look, in my sleep-deprived state, like a very small, very wise old man. I held them both and thought about all the language Derek had used to describe my inadequacy for this exact moment. Scattered, unstable, unsuitable. And I thought, look at what I made. Look at what was true about me even when someone was telling me it wasn't. My mother cried. She's not a crier. She stood at the window and cried quietly and then straightened up and asked the nurse a very practical question about feeding schedules, which was how she processed enormous things. Derek sent a message 3 days after they were born. Polite, brief. Congratulations. He hoped I was well. He mentioned, almost parenthetically, that his Meridian project had encountered regulatory complications, and he was pursuing legal remedies. I read it and felt nothing in particular. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a kind of clean indifference, the emotional equivalent of a room that has been aired out. I put my phone face down and picked up Lily, who was making the small, insistent sound that meant she had opinions about the current situation. I know, I told her. Me too. We're going to be fine. The cracked picture frame has been sitting on my windowsill since August, nearly a year now. I never replaced the glass. Marcus pointed out once that it would make a good display case as is if I put something in it that didn't need protecting. Something that wanted to be seen. I had been thinking about that. What to put in a frame designed to show rather than protect. What looks right in a space that used to hold something broken. Lily and Owen are asleep in the next room and the city is making its night sounds and Marcus is in the kitchen doing the particular brand of quiet that I have come to understand is not emptiness but presence. The kind of presence that doesn't require noise to be real. My mother is downstairs with Gloria, who has taken a strong position on being the twins' honorary grandmother, a role no one technically offered her but which she has occupied with total confidence. My freelance business is not freelance anymore. I incorporated in May. I have 3 employees and a waiting list. I design things that mean something to people and I charge appropriately for it, and no one has handed me a performance review in 11 months. I called my mother last Sunday, same as always. I told her about the clients in the city and the coffee shop where I go on Friday mornings with the double stroller that takes up too much sidewalk and which I refuse to apologize for. Are you happy? She asked. which is a question she has been asking with more frequency lately, as if she is taking an ongoing measurement of something important. I thought about the frame on the windowsill, the key cut to the right angle, the soup on hard nights, the two small people in the next room who decided to exist during the exact period of my life when someone was most certain they wouldn't. Yes, I said, I really am. She was quiet in the comfortable way she has when something she's been waiting on has finally arrived. Good, she said. That's what I needed to hear. Outside, Denver was doing whatever Denver does in late summer. A little rain, a little gold in the leaves starting, the mountains visible and calm at the edge of everything. I stood at the window with my coffee and looked at the cracked frame and thought, I know what goes in it now. A blank canvas. White, clean, unmarked. Not because the story hasn't happened, because it has all of it, the worst and the best of it, but because the frame's job now isn't to hold the past. It's to hold whatever comes next. I think that's enough. I think that's exactly enough.